Greetings. Question. Which kernel to choose? I see this as a concern for many of my viewers. I have a formed opinion on this issue. But Linux is dynamically developing, and my opinion may be simply outdated. So now let's figure out whether it makes sense to use custom kernels or to sit on the stock one. Kernels are a rather complex issue. After all, the community writes different kernels for different families of systems. So in Debian, in addition to the stock and RT kernels, there are Xanmod and Liquorix. Ubuntu has low latency, and as I understood it, it is the same as Debian RT, which means real time. And Arch has Zen and TKG. I wanted to make the test comprehensive, at least as comprehensive as it could be. That's why I divided these tests. Today we will test the Debian kernels, and next time we will test Arch. I suggest you subscribe so you don't miss the tests on Arch. I don't know about Fedora. If you are actively using Fedora, please write what you have. Which kernels to test? So I took 7 games to compare the kernels. Skyrim, of course, Fallout 4, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Cyberpunk 2077, Elden Ring, World War Z, and Metro Exodus. The logic is simple. Fallout 4, Skyrim, and Tomb Raider use the DirectX 11 API. Although Fallout and Skyrim use the same engine, I decided not to deprive the fans of both games. Cyberpunk and Elden Ring are DirectX 12, World War Z, and Metro Exodus use Vulkan. I don't see any point in testing anything on DirectX 9. There was also supposed to be an OpenGL representative in the testing, but CSGO refused to turn off vertical synchronization, so it was excluded from the list. For the test, I installed Liquorix, Xanmod, and RT in addition to the stock kernel. At the time of testing, the kernel versions were as follows. Stock kernel version 6.3.0-1, RT 6.1.0-9, Xanmod 6.4.4-x64 VIA4, and Liquorix 6.4.4-1. It's normal that custom kernel versions are slightly ahead of the stock ones. In real use, it will be so I don't see the point in installing the same version. Although this could give more objective results, it is farther from reality. So, yes, other computer settings can be seen on the screen. And I'll say right away that the settings in the games are chosen for a comfortable game for me. Somewhere medium-high, somewhere medium-low. I think it is more important that they are the same. After all, we're here to see not how the hardware handles games, but what difference can cores make, if any. The first game is Fallout 4. I think you'll agree that Diamond City is one of the hardest places. That's why I chose it. A short run through the market, then around the farm and the pumping station, and we have these results. The graphs repeat each other's silhouettes. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that the graph of the runoff core is more colorful than the others. It is slightly offset from the others, but this is a purely technical error. If we compare the average FPS, Liquorix is the leader here. Both the minimum and maximum FPS are higher. Let's move on, and I will make conclusions at the end. Next up is Skyrim, Whiterun. The game is made on the same engine, so you can put an equal sign between the games, albeit very conditionally. If you look at the average values, you'll see that the stock kernel is in first place. But if you pay attention to the graph, specifically to this spot, you can see a peak with 220 frames per second. Whether I accidentally grabbed the menu or pressed ESC, it was enough to push the stock core to the top. If you don't take this point into account, the graphs are generally the same, but again, the stock one is more colorful. And here, the variegation cannot be attributed to the difference in the means of recording the results. The data for the graphs were collected using Mango Hood. This time, Liquorix and Xanmod showed the same results. Tomb Raider shadows have a built-in benchmark. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here and use it. The benchmark consists of 3 scenes of varying complexity. The graphs show data from 3 times in a row. And here again, something went wrong, and the Liquorix graph moved a little bit in time. Therefore, it is worth analyzing the first part. In general, the trend is repeated. The stock core has a lower frames per second and is generally more colorful. Liquorix is in the lead. I would also like to point out that Xanmod has a smoother FPS and frame time graph than Liquorix. All of these games use DirectX 11, but it is slowly fading into the background, and more games are being released on the newer DirectX 12. I chose Cyberpunk 2077 and Elden Ring as representatives of this API. For Cyberpunk, I use one of the first missions. There is a long scenario, a car trip, which allows you to get plus or minus the same load. What can I say about this game looking at the graphs? Well, the game bends my computer. All the graphs are like a picket fence. It is clearly seen that Liquorix dominates here as well, and the RT core showed the worst result. Interesting. I also want to note that Xanmod in this game is not far behind the stock kernel. The situation with Elden Ring is even more interesting. Xanmod is again at about the same level as the stock kernel, and RT is 10% behind. In addition, all kernels have huge peaks in the frame time graph. Although in Liquorix, these peaks are slightly smaller. Liquorix only consolidates its position as a leader in these tests. Let's move on to the next block. This is a Vulkan. And there is a peculiarity here. All games before this were launched through the Wine request translator. And since Wine is being developed using the reverse engineering method, some requests may be interpreted incorrectly for now. That is, there may be some minimal losses, especially in the translation from DirectX 12. In principle, this is the case, judging by the tests. After all, everything is already clear with 11, and even more so with 9. Although we all know that, especially on AMD cards, the losses are so small that they are imperceptible. The next test is interesting because it's Vulkan. Linux supports this API without any problems. WWZ, although it runs through Wine, still uses Vulkan. And Metro is native to Linux. I wonder how it will all work. The first game on Vulkan, World War Z, it's a pretty interesting cooperative game where you exterminate a crowd of Russian communists who shout Goida. Goida! The game has its own benchmark, so let's use this option again. Moreover, the game is cooperative, and it is almost impossible to recreate the scene. The frametime graph shows that the stock kernel again sins with a jagged line. Other kernels produced a smoother graph. Xanmod showed the best results, outperforming the stock kernel by 15%, although Liquorix is only 2 frames behind. And in conclusion, you asked for it, so I added it. Metro Exodus. 4 noble gentlemen asked to add this game in the Discord voting, and that was enough for my decision. But don't do it again. A moment of off-topic. First, there's the bench. The game has it, but for some reason it is not available for the Linux version. I had to think about which scene to use. We chose the beginning of the Volga section, but the adventure didn't end there because for some reason the game doesn't save more than 3 saves. Maybe I have a little crooked hands, but for each core, I had to rewatch the opening scene before this section, because the autosave shifted the save I needed until it disappeared. I already know that scene by heart. And the second reason is the setting. I was embarrassed to realize that I was playing as a Russian. Yes, it's a game, yes, it's from Ukrainian developers, but the realization that it takes place in Russia, and the main characters are Russian, made me feel uncomfortable. On the one hand, it was interesting to look for hidden propaganda here, because literally in the introduction, you can already hear the phrase, "We don't abandon our own." But I don't know if I will ever be able to return to this game. Let it stay in Steam, because I'm not ready to play it yet. Although, it is a good sample for testing. Native Vulkan and all that. Write what you think about it. I'm interested to hear what other people think about this game. We reflected and that's it. Let's get back to the topic of the video. Based on my measurements and the videos I watched on the internet, I conclude that custom kernels make sense. But individual needs should be taken into account. Some people's games did not respond to the kernel change. For me, all games perform better on custom kernels. I'm guessing that these tests won't help you understand whether a particular kernel will help you. You need to see for yourself. On AMD hardware, performance and smoothness should increase. I also noticed that with custom kernels, the impact of OBS is less. Therefore, based on these results, I can say that if you are a gamer or a streamer, you should definitely try custom kernels. If I do start streaming, I will use Liquorix, because to my surprise, it has shown itself to be particularly good. I would also add that on custom kernels, you can enable F-Sync technology, which for some reason is not available on stock ones. This can add a few frames. After the tests, I'm thinking of either switching, or at least just keeping the Liquorix kernel installed. It's interesting that Liquorix has become a favorite in these tests. It's just that Xanmod is somehow more hyped than Liquorix. Or maybe it's just the time again that Liquorix has shown itself better. I'm dumbed down somewhere, and the tests are not tests at all. In a nutshell, kernels are too individual an issue to rely on someone else's tests. But it is definitely worth a try.